The number of children ingesting rare earth magnets, powerful tiny balls that are a popular desk toy and can shred a child's intestines, has skyrocketed in the 3 years since courts blocked the efforts of federal regulators to force changes to the industry, which largely holds the power to regulate itself. The nation's poison control centers are on track to record 6 times more magnet ingestions, totaling nearly 1,600 cases, this year than in 2016, when a federal court first sided with industry to lift the Consumer Product Safety Commission's 4-year ban on the product. Medical researchers say the only explanation for the spike is the return of these unusually strong magnets to the market after the court ruling. Now, with the CPSC largely sidelined, magnet industry officials have launched a new effort to prevent product injuries and deaths through voluntary safety standards. Used for thousands of consumer products, these voluntary standards are supposed to reflect a balance between business and safety interests. But during the creation of voluntary standards for magnets, the priorities of safety groups and regulators have been drowned out by the desires of manufacturers, who often decide which safety options are considered and hold an advantage in voting on which rules will take effect, according to a Washington Post review that included listening to hours of public standard-setting meetings and obtaining emails about the process, along with interviews and documents. Problems with voluntary safety standards extend beyond magnets, critics say, to other children's products, including infant-inclined sleepers, crib bumpers and furniture at risk of toppling over. In many cases, the CPSC can't act until the voluntary standards have proved inadequate. It makes our jobs harder to have to defer by law to an extremely inefficient and industry-focused process, said Elliot Kay, a CPSC commissioner and former agency chairman. The voluntary standards process, he said, has cost lives. In the magnets case, which played out over recent weeks, manufacturers drew clear limits on how far they were willing to go for safety. They would consider only standards that don't change the utility, functionality and desirability of the product for adults, Craig Zucker, who runs a magnet company, said in an email to others on the committee deciding the proposed safety rules. But safety advocates said that the committee should look at anything that might avoid accidents. Otherwise, Don Huber, director of product safety for Consumer Reports, said in an email to the committee, "I am struggling to see how it will be anything beyond a marginal improvement." The magnet makers wanted to rely on written warnings and packaging designs to curb accidental ingestions, according to emails and committee conference calls. Safety advocates said that wasn't enough. They wanted the magnets either to be too big to swallow or too weak to cause organ damage. The magnets commonly found in desk toys are made up of sometimes hundreds of magnetic balls, and swallowing just 2 is a medical emergency, doctors say. Why not try making them too big to swallow? Asked pediatric gastroenterologist Brian Rudolph during a November 21 call to discuss the standard. Because nobody would follow it, Zucker replied. Gruesome injuries. Other products that pose dangers to children have highlighted the limitations of the voluntary standards process. Before being recalled this year because they were associated with the deaths of dozens of children, inclined sleepers had been covered by a voluntary standard that pediatricians argued failed to follow established guidelines for safe sleep. A voluntary safety standard also exists for crib bumpers, despite warnings from medical authorities that the products are unnecessary and dangerous. And safety advocates had been struggling for years to get furniture manufacturers to agree to stricter voluntary standards aimed at preventing furniture tip-overs, a problem responsible for the deaths of at least 200 children since 2000. Under pressure from victims' families, industry officials finally tightened the standard earlier this year. It's a flawed process, said Nancy Cowles, who sits on several voluntary standard committees as executive director of the advocacy group Kids in Danger. There are times when it works. But it often feels like we are only slowing down the process. Shihan Ku, who heads the company that makes Zen magnets, said in an interview that he agrees that high-powered magnets are an inherently dangerous product. That's what it is. Ku said he supports efforts to keep the products away from children. But he disagreed with actions that would either fundamentally change the product or ban it. He previously led the court fight against the CPSC that resulted in the magnet ban being overturned in 2016. You can't just make all small things big so kids won't choke on them, Ku said. Rare earth magnets are unusually dangerous because they are often 10 times stronger than the ordinary magnets used to hold a shopping list to a refrigerator. If multiple rare earth magnets, each the size of a BB pellet, are swallowed, they can pull together inside the intestines, potentially causing life-threatening holes and blockages. Emergency surgery is the usual result. "This is one of the most dangerous products on the market," said Rudolph, the pediatric gastroenterologist who participated in the standards process. Rudolph said the risks were greater than with other ingestions he sees involving children, such as coins or button batteries. "These injuries are gruesome," he said. Julie Brown, a pediatric emergency room doctor, said she sees on average one case a month at her hospital, Seattle Children's. "Yet most people don't understand the risks posed by these magnets," she said, "and the injuries can be severe. They can make kids very sick," Brown said. Accidental ingestion of high-powered magnets emerged as a problem in 2005. The magnets were breaking free from toys. Magnetic construction sets soon were blamed for at least one death and dozens of intestinal injuries, according to the CPSC. In response, a voluntary safety standard was created in 2007 to limit the power of loose magnets in toys and to require powerful magnets to be permanently connected so they can't be swallowed. The problem subsided. But sales of high-powered magnet sets exploded 2 years later. This time, the magnets were found in desk toys popular for playing or modeling different shapes. And they were not covered by the toy safety standard because they were not meant for children. In 2011, the CPSC issued its first public warning about the hidden hazard associated with these innocent-looking magnets. The next year, as the ingestions continued, the agency passed mandatory regulations that essentially banned the strong magnet sets. Most companies agreed to stop selling them. But 2 firms refused. The CPSC asked a judge to force a recall against them. Zucker, who referred questions from the Post to other industry representatives, ran one of the recalcitrant firms, Maxfield and Oberton, which made popular magnets called buckyballs. Zucker launched a public relations campaign painting the agency as overzealous and trying to shut down freedom-loving entrepreneurs. He worked with Nancy Nord, a former CPSC commissioner working as a lawyer for companies facing regulatory action. "No one is discounting the severity of the injuries," Nord said in an interview. "But the question is, how do you address the problem?" Eventually, Zucker stopped selling the magnets as part of an agreement with the CPSC. His company was also voluntarily dissolved. But the other company, Zen Magnets, and its leader, Ku, kept fighting. He convinced a federal judge that the CPSC made mistakes when it declared the magnets a substantial product hazard. And a federal appellate court in 2016 overturned the agency's mandatory rule that served as a product ban, criticizing the CPSC for critical ambiguities and complexities in the data used to justify its actions. So in late 2016, for the first time in 4 years, rare earth magnets were legal to sell. That ended what appeared to be a successful experiment in injury prevention. Magnet ingestions had fallen by almost half during the 4-year timeout, from an estimated 3,617 hospital emergency room visits in 2012 to 1,907 visits 3 years later, according to a medical study published last year in the Journal of Pediatric Gastroenterology and Nutrition. The sudden loss of the 2016 ban left no regulations in place on high-powered magnets. Ku thought this was a problem. He saw competitors selling magnets with no warnings at all. His Zen magnets are sold with warnings that include, "These magnets are not a toy for children." He petitioned the CPSC to ask it to write a mandatory rule requiring warning labels and packaging designs to prevent children from using the product. Safety groups opposed his effort because they said it didn't go far enough, according to documents and interviews. But the CPSC was frozen, unable to agree on how to pursue new regulations in light of the court decisions, according to Kay, who was the agency's chairman at the time. A CPSC spokesman declined to comment. Meanwhile, the public was mostly unaware of the debate over magnet safety. 2 magnets swallowed. "I had no idea they were dangerous," said Sarah Cohen, a pediatric nurse and mother in Philadelphia who bought a set of high-powered magnets as a toy for her 7-year-old son, Aaron, for Christmas in 2016. 3 nights later, her son was in a hospital, complaining of stomach pains. An X-ray revealed he'd swallowed 2 magnetic balls. Surgeons removed one. Rather than make a second incision in his intestines, they decided to monitor the boy. He had frequent X-rays until the magnet passed 2 months later. "It never occurred to me that this could happen," Cohen said. In February, the same group that worked to defeat the CPSC's mandatory standards, Ku, Zucker and Nord, turned its attention to drafting a voluntary safety standard. The process for creating voluntary safety standards for most consumer products is handled through ASTM International, an organization that helps develop technical standards for thousands of products. ASTM officials said that the organization emphasizes a consensus approach designed to allow all parties a chance to influence the outcome. The CPSC's role is limited. Agency employees had been barred by agency regulations from taking leadership positions or voting on proposed standards until 2016, when the commissioners decided to relax the rules. Since then, CPSC staff have been allowed to take on larger roles with the blessing of the agency's executive director. Permission was granted for magnets.